A lot of people are starting to question, where does government get the authority to infinitely raise taxes and expand their own authority in apparent violation of constitutional limitations? We have a right to own property, yet property is taxed. We have a right to travel, but they tell us we must be licensed to drive our cars whether or not we have caused any damage by driving a car. There's obviously some kind of major disconnect between the rights and freedoms that are legally provided to us in the Constitution and the controls and costs that government arbitrarily imposes upon us. The Constitution is violated every day by the wording in many statutes and codes and by the actions of the state, and the state is no longer concerned with correcting these problems or even admitting that they exist. You may have noticed that what calls itself government is always asking for your signature on licenses, permits, applications, tax forms, and such. If it is our legitimate government, why does it need our signature on anything? If it were acting on constitutional authority, could it not just identify us as citizens and tell us what we're required to do? The fact is, our Constitution does not allow government to tax us on our earnings, or infringe on our right to travel, or tax our property, or interfere in any way with any of our harmless activity. Government does not intrinsically have that authority. The only way they can penalize us for harmless behavioral violations of their codes and get us to comply with endless reams of arbitrary nonsense is if we agree to sign something giving up the rights that we have naturally and automatically under the Constitution. They must get us to agree to step outside the Constitution where simple force and command is all they need to control us. This is not constitutional government authority at all. It is fabricated authority. All of the infringements on us of government demands, nuisance, and thievery are based on contracts that we sign, thinking we have no choice, and without really knowing what those contracts are going to cost us. Your signature can never be lawfully coerced. You can never be denied any government service for refusing to sign something. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that you can have the service and protection of government if you sign something. If you are a lawful citizen, then everything government is and does is owed to you. If the government makes you think that you are required to sign something, they are coercing you into contract, and that contract is corrupt and technically unenforceable due to that coercion. The same is true if the full terms of the contract are not disclosed to you, which they rarely are. This business of getting you to sign something is nothing more than a devious and deceitful scam to get you to waive your rights and become a slave in one way or another to a corporate entity posing as government. After we sign these civic contracts, government begins to treat us as though we are slaves to their every desire, and they're very careful to never tell us how they did that. Was there ever a time when you signed a government form and wished you didn't have to do it? That means you were coerced. Actually, you didn't have to sign it. You may never be required to imprint your signature without your full consent. You may never be penalized or denied any right or service that is otherwise owed to you by refusing to sign anything. Your signature represents your full voluntary agreement with the terms of the contract. When you sign something, you are regarded legally as the author of that contract. If you don't want to sign something, or you don't understand it, you should never provide your signature. And you should never permit anyone to threaten you in any way for refusing to sign. It is important to remember that slavery does not always require force. Anytime you agree to become a slave, you can become a slave. The word slavery does not have to be in the contract. If you give up your property, rights, and freedoms or status, you are entering slavery in one form or another. If you sign something where you agree to comply or be controlled in any way, you are entering slavery voluntarily. And to get out, you must revoke that contract. Most civic programs nowadays depend on our ignorance of their illegitimate status as they demand that we sign up for their artificial force, command, and control. The proof of the illegitimacy of what calls itself government is that they need to acquire our signature on various instruments before they have any right to act against us in any way. We have to invite them to put us into their slavery. Our signature is our invitation. Constitutionally, we are all free sovereigns who may not be diverted in any way from our harmless travels, business, and pursuit of happiness. Obviously, the Constitution is no longer being observed by the people who swear to uphold it. They inflict mandatory taxes and compliance on us as if it were the natural way of things, as if we were slaves and they were masters. If we want to be free again, we must learn to not sign contracts with civic agencies, and we must revoke the contracts we already have signed. If you must sign it, it's not a constitutional or legitimate government function. It is a corporate contract, luring you into servitude and contribution to the state, as if the state can simply reach out and take from you whatever of yours it decides it needs. Our government was designed and created to be a harmless and incidental maintainer of civic infrastructure and a defender of our borders from attackers. Our government has reinvented itself as a tyrannical meddler and thief, touching absolutely every tiny corner of our lives with damage and nuisance that is strictly prohibited in our supreme law, the Constitution. Every one of us has signed something enabling them to do that. Men and women are not automatically subject to the made-up, quasi-governmental corporate jurisdictions that suffocate us today. To become obligated or controlled, we must first enter those jurisdictions by signing contracts, such as driver's licenses, tax forms, business licenses, marriage licenses, various permits, certifications, applications, many other contractual instruments, which civic agencies must have in their files before they can arbitrarily act against you, as they constantly now do. Of course, when we sign those instruments, we're generally not told of all the obligations presumed against us under those contracts and all the rights we are presumed to forfeit when we sign those contracts with the corporate entities who are posing as governments. Again, when the government is conducting legitimate activity, your signature is not required. The single piece of evidence that government is trying to expand its authorities and privileges is when they are asking you for your signature. Because of the lack of disclosure of the presumed terms of those contracts, there is question whether they're valid at all. If any deception or coercion is committed in the securement of a contract, that contract is not valid or legally enforceable. Yet enforce it they do, because after all, you signed something and therefore you must agree. If you sign a form to get a driver's license, you are promising to obey all the vehicle codes. But what happens when they change those codes? You've not agreed to the changes. Government no longer has your willing consent to compliance. So what do? They tell you that you must renew your license or registration periodically. That's proof of what I'm saying. There's certainly no need for renewal of legitimate government authority. By applying for or renewing a driver's license, you are declaring that you need one. You are declaring yourself to be subject to whatever terms may have been invented by the DMV corporate subculture. Having a driver's license does not mean you are a safe and qualified driver. It means you have declared yourself to be subject to DMV rules and corporate authority posing as government. It means that you agree to pay fees, fines, and charges when the DMV or the courts want you to pay. You agree to walk into a jail cell when they want you to do that. The Constitution does not allow government to charge you for traveling. You must sign away that right to be subject to those charges. The license applications and renewals are your personal declaration that you need to be licensed to drive. Your agreement that you must have a special piece of identification in your pocket or purse. It is your signature, not the Constitution, that declares you are willing to be a servant to those who want to seize your right to travel. You may believe that licensing every single driver in society makes the roads safer. That's debatable. But even if it is true, there are many ways to make roads safer without taxing and controlling every single driver, the good ones along with the bad. It's the bad drivers that we should be concerned with, not taking away the rights and taxing all the drivers when it violates their right to travel. Most agencies representing themselves as government can strangely be found in the private corporation listings on Dun and Bradstreet, and they are not acting in the public interest at all. They are private, for-profit corporations, and they are not constitutionally authorized governments or government agencies. They are treasonous imposters claiming rights against your earnings, savings, property, and freedom. That corporate imposter government includes our court system, our federal agencies, state and local governments, even law enforcement agencies and officers. Wherever you find unconstitutional enforcements, those are not legitimate governments or authorized civic agencies. Our constitutional government has been gradually, silently, and fraudulently replaced by a corporate matrix of predatory, for-profit institutions which prey on the public for profit and power and which claim unlimited authority without explaining where that authority possibly could have come from. The website internallydisplacedpeople.org is a public service to help people remove themselves from the questionable jurisdictions and obligations that they did not intend to enter, and often were not even told they were entering, and had no legal obligation to enter, since most of those contracts are licensing activities that you and I have a right to do anyway, such as travel on the roads that we paid for and own property that we paid for. As we have seen by the ill-conceived and failed endless drug war, which has imprisoned millions of people who had no victim, and by official highway piracy under the euphemism of civil asset forfeiture, which steals billions of dollars a year from people who are charged with no crime and who receive no due process, not to mention thousands of police shootings where officers have faced no prosecution, much less any serious investigation. More and more of us are being subject to these gross injustices by this system and by some ignorant police who feel entitled to threaten and commit violence and force against us as they accomplish nothing but profiteering for their employers. InternallyDisplacedPeople.org was created to help all people who would like to find resources and solutions to help enable them to avoid and revoke the fraudulent civic contracts they have been convinced to sign, and to join the rapidly growing community of people who are discovering and applying our legal remedies and holding officials accountable for their violations and atrocities against us, and who have conveniently forgotten their oaths of office to uphold the Constitution. That website explains how they help recover and protect our rights, freedoms, and our assets by positioning us outside the fictional corporate jurisdictions that are used to control us, to seize our assets and wealth, and even imprison us for harmless behavior. To do that, as the website explains, we must take some steps to revoke the fraudulent civic contracts that we have been told we must sign. This website is a vital civic resource for people to understand the law and reach their full potential as civic participants and as free men and women while maintaining a social order determined by us, not by money-hungry corporate tyrants, and not by a vast army of badly corrupted and misinformed law enforcement officers. Without question, we face a battle. Our corrupt officials and highly paid bureaucrats will certainly oppose constitutional restoration. Whether a person makes a living honestly or not, they always want to go on making a living. That is why we who love freedom and justice must rely on each other to find a way forward. The following short video segments are introductions by Jackie Fig to some of the decontracting issues and solutions that are addressed at their website, internallydisplacedpeople.org. I highly recommend you visit the website and look into the solutions and networking opportunities that you will find there.
So the idea of the internally displaced people.org website is to provide people a space where they can learn how to cancel contracts that they have with the state. You can go to the internallydisplacedpeople.org, where you will find the navigation bar on the left, and you'll be able to click on the navigation bar and go to a page that will help you with cancel a particular contract. If you provide services that you think will be helpful for people who are looking to get out of the system, then please contact us at info@internallydisplacedpeople.org, and we would like to place a link of the services that you provide on our website to help people unplug from the system. Canceling voter registration is an important element of getting out of the system. If you think that you may be registered to vote somewhere, you can generally go onto the Secretary of State's website and you can check to see if you are registered to vote. If you are, you will need to cancel that voter registration. There will be some letters and communications that you can use on the internallydisplacedpeople.org website that will help you unplug from the system. I know for some people that's going to be kind of a difficult and different concept. You think that your vote actually counts, but what you're actually doing is giving your power to Washington, D.C., and those people do not do anything for any of us. Since when did your vote ever count? Employment and business professionals have a whole different set of problems. There are two elements that we need to look at, and one is the business district, which is zoned a zoned area for businesses and is considered territory that's been ceded to the United States of America and operating under the Commerce Clause. The other element is licensing and registration. If you look at the top of your certification, it will say state of whatever, and you'll see that that's the way they claim their territory. On internallydisplacedpeople.org website, we will be researching and looking at various elements to help you step out of that side of the system by providing information on forming associations, trusts, and other business entities that you can use and remove yourself from that side of the system. If you are someone that provides services that would help people to exit out of the business and employment section, then please contact us at info@internallydisplacedpeople.org and let us know what services you provide, and we will be happy to put a link up on the website so that people can locate you and get the help that they need. If you're old enough to be going to college and signing the contract for college, you can opt out of being a resident and choose non-resident tuition. It is more expensive, but you have to kind of weigh up the pros and cons of whether you want to be in the system or outside the system. Another thing that you can do is you can sit in and audit the class. In other words, you can attend classes, get the books, take the tests, and pretty much participate. But at the end of the day, you won't get the degree. There's a few other things that you can do. You can not give your social security number, and that's a very small difference that you can do. It doesn't quite get you out, but it does make a difference. And at internallydisplacedpeople.org website, we can help you work through the steps to ultimately get out of the system through the education system. If you have children in secondary or elementary education, then that brings you into residency. This is kind of a difficult layer to combat. But at the internallydisplacedpeople.org, we hope to facilitate and bring people together, forming associations, education associations, and perhaps online schooling and other methods, homeschooling, to help you bring your children out of the system and keep you out of the residency element. Filing property tax exemptions is another scam. They take the overall value of your property, they reduce it by some $7,000, and then they assess your taxes. So there's very little benefit, and you lose status. At internallydisplacedpeople.org, we would like to help people move out of that whole taxation system. So if you're out there and you have done land patents, if you've gotten people off of the ad valorem tax rolls, then please contact us. Please put links on our site, as we would like to provide your services to people who come onto the internallydisplacedpeople.org. Possession of a driver's license has your residence address on it. In the application, you agreed that you was a resident. In fact, you signed on the penalties of perjury that you was a resident, and this most definitely puts you into the residency layer. Registration of vehicles also puts you into that layer. And on internallydisplacedpeople.org, we have a page where we can help you to opt out of both registration and driver's licenses.